Okay, that's better. It was muted. So we'll just pause the video there for that little error. So I'm going to be doing the first section of this talk, and JJ is going to come up for the second section. We're going to do about 30 minutes each. And this is the title, and also a brilliant illustration by my brother Emmanuel, of what we're looking at today. It's called the Geomancy of the Giants, or Giant Geomancers. And we're looking really at the British Isles here. Now, previously, I've written a book with Jim Vieira, Giants on Record, about the American giant story, actual skeletons, legends, academic record accounts, that there were actually giants existing in prehistoric times. Now, also in Britain, this is the case, and we're not just, when we research this, we're not just looking for evidence of giant skeletons. That's just one aspect of it. What fascinates me more is the fact that many of these giant myths, and also these are the locations where these bones are found, are often actually related to how they worked with the landscape, how they worked with alignments, astronomy, metrology, ancient measurement systems, and other such things. And this book on the right is a classic book written by the brilliant Anthony Roberts back in 1978, called Sowers of Thunder, which looks at the whole mythos of giants in a landscape perspective, looking at the geomancy. And it really is an amazing book, if you can get a copy of it. And we're basing our new book, The Giants of Stonehenge and Ancient Britain, partly on Anthony's research, so big respect to him. He died in 1990, actually on top of Glastonbury tour. I know Andrew and other people knew him. He was a contemporary with John Michel. But he was really the first person to put it out there, and that these stories of giants have some meaning to them. They're not just fantasy, they're not just folklore, they're not just, stories passed down from generation. There's much more knowledge and wisdom and science even encoded within this. And this research I've been doing for this new book, which is going to come out at some point early next year, really kind of goes full circle back to the research I've been doing for a long time, which is looking at the alignments in the landscape, the ley lines, the geomancy, earth grids, and other such things. Partly based on the book I wrote way back in 2008 called Earth Grids. But there's many aspects that kind of come up in this research, whether you're looking at giant lore or not. These are the things we really have to look at. Obviously there's classic geomancy, which translates as divination of the earth, geodesy, which is division of the earth, and archaeogeodesy, which is all about the ancient place determination, bringing in different factors, really related to ancient sites. Obviously geometry and sacred geometry come into this, and we find Pythagorean triangles marking the entire landscape around Britain. Obviously we have ley lines and the extension of ley lines, which are great earth circles, which divide the earth in two, and archaeoastronomy, which is all linked with this. And then we even have kind of legends and stories where this is often when dragons come into the picture, especially here in Britain, of earth energy lines and telluric currents. And really when you get into these myths and these stories, and you go deep into the old records and you find the original sources of where these were written down, we do find that they're encoding very high knowledge about how they worked the landscape. In tradition, giants thrived in high places, up on hilltops. They created these hill forts. We have this picture at the top showing giants moving stones around. We also have the classic story of Gog and Magog being defeated by Brutus and thrown off the cliffs on the south coast. And we actually see an image of that here. But interestingly, some of the stories relate to Gog and Magog of that he was connected. He was basically said he was so strong he could uproot an oak tree and shake it like a hazel wand. This is really intriguing because this hazel wand is an old form of divination. It's an old form of the way they use certain types of rods made of hazel to divine the land. So the fact we're finding these little clues within these ancient texts, to me, is fascinating. We'll find out more as we go through the talk. Interestingly, where he was thrown off the cliff, in some traditions, it was called Deadman's Point, or in another version, Dodman's Point. And if you're into the lay hunter kind of movement, the whole idea of Dodman is a surveyor of the ancient land. We find this potentially represented in the Long Man of Wilmington down in Sussex. In Cornwall, we have many, many different accounts of these stone-throwing, earth-moving giants who worked with the landscape and had all these battles, throwing hammers and dropping stones from their apron and other such things, and creating these ancient sites. Perhaps the most famous is the story of St Michael's Mount and Cormoran, who was a famous giant who was said to be 18 feet tall. And some traditions have that translated as giant of the sea, or Cal Moran. And him and his wife lived on this mount, and he would get her to do a bulk of the work by carrying stones in an apron. And this is a thing we're going to get into a little bit later, and JJ is going to talk more about this, about the importance of what this apron represents. And they were said, these giants and his wife were said to have walked from shore to shore, moving stones, massive stones around, and they would throw hammers to each other, they would drop stones from the apron, and so on and so forth. But even at St Michael's Mount, where we have all these legends, an actual giant skeleton was unearthed, which was over 8 feet tall a few hundred years ago. We're going to feature this, but this is what this account actually comes from. So this is the start of this idea where we're finding these giant burials, either placed there because it's where a mythos was encoded in the land, or the mythos emerged from the fact that these giants were found there. So there's a lot going on here. We also have these very interesting alignments, the St Michael line going all the way across southern England. We're just seeing the Cornwall French section here. And then the Apollo current, or the St Michael European axis that goes down through Europe. And interestingly, there's many sites along these. Even Mont Saint-Michel has this as well. All along both of these lines, we have these giant legends and stories of stone moving and earth moving and so on and so forth. Carbray in Cornwall is an interesting example. A town was over Red Roof, and this has got, people say there's Inca-style terracing and cyclopean walls up there. And according to legend, the giant John, he was called, would often throw boulders at neighbouring giants, and they would throw them back to each other. This is why the hillside is covered in rocks. And it's also said to be the meeting place of local Titan leaders, or local giant rulers. And they would actually have gatherings there, and they would have battles, they would throw stones to each other, like games of quoits, they're called in some traditions. But to me, this harks back to an era where these great people who were building these megalithic sites would actually get together and plan their work in the landscape. The giant's bolster is another one, and the whole story of St Agnes. And still today, there are parades of these giant effigies around certain areas of Cornwall. Bolster was said to have walked from two several miles distant in one step. St Agnes Beacon to another tin mining area and other parts of the landscape. This is just actually a map from John Michel's classic book on Cornwall that came out in the early 70s, and even a Boscawen Un stone circle. Not only do we have the classic stone circle and many astronomical alignments and ley lines coming out from it, and there's stories of giants walking from the Scilly Isles across the land to this area. And interestingly, there's actually what is called the giant's footprint in a stone nearby to that, which is said to be where he placed his foot as he was stepping across the landscape, forming these ley lines. And so the stories go on and on and on. I could give you 100, maybe 150 stories that we're going to feature in the book, talking about this and the way that this myth coincides with what has been discovered already in the landscape. We have more here, obviously. Again, this is to do with Cormoran, who lived on St Michael's Mount. And this is an interesting one, because, again, he was the lord of the sea mount. The two giants assisted each other in the endless reshaping of the landscape. And they threw boulders to one another as recreation on Trencrom Hill. And this is to explain why so many stones are lying around there. But in one version, They only had one large hammer to do their megalithic work. And because of this, they would throw it to each other over and over again. And unfortunately, his wife got hit by the hammer one day and pretty much died. And so this is, again, another representation of how the landscape is represented. We even have the same kind of story here in London. We have hammer-throwing giantesses in Putney and Fulham. This is really intriguing. Back in 1787, in Gross's Provincial Glossary, he describes how they used this hammer to build the churches of Fulham and also in Putney on either side of the river. When they threw it to one another, they would respectfully yell, "Put it nigh and heave it full home," where the names Putney and Fulham were derived from, apparently. So here's an image of my nephew looking absolutely fascinated to be at this stone on his phone. This is my nephew Joe. But this is another interesting account. This is like from the Birmingham area. This is the Gilbert stone. And it said that Gilbert carried this stone and he deposited it at a mysterious angle to change the boundary to his own advantage. And that is what the legend states. So within just the basic kind of information board at this particular stone, this is what it says. So he's creating and placing stones for specific angles and creations of geomancy, really, in the landscape. We have Wansdyke and also Maze Knoll that were created by the giant builder called Gorm. And he used to travel along straight lines with a shovel full of earth on his shoulder. And one day he stumbled in the Avon Valley and created a prehistoric hill fort, Maze Knoll. And then he kind of dragged his shovel accidentally through the earth and created the longest dike in Britain, which stretches for 80 miles in the Avon Valley, all the way to Andover, Hampshire. And so we have other stories that continue of him dropping and falling in the sea and creating islands and other such things. The Wrekin as well is a remarkably large earthwork. Similar themes attached to it like the Gorm mythos, with a persistent legend that some local giants were involved in its construction. We have a similar thing down near Leicester, the Mount Sorrel. You may have heard this. This is actually in the introduction by Paul Devereux of Sowers of Thunder. And this is interesting because the giant bell, and this is like sort of Celtic connotations, Belinus and so forth, who was supposed to be the ancient king who created straight roads with Bonbutius, of course. And he took 3 prodigious leaps, beginning on Mount Sorrel. He leapt 1 mile to a place called One Leap, which is now called One Lip, and eventually to Birstall, where apparently he burst. That's where the name came from, when his horse burst and killed him. And then the final leap properly killed him, and this has become known as Belgrave, or Bell's Grave, where he was supposed to be buried. So even within the basic landscape of various hills in Leicester, we have this legend, which is encoding straight line alignments. And to me, this is utterly fascinating that everything seems to come back to this giant mythos. Even in London, with the London Stone, it was said to have been brought to the area by Brutus with the giant Gog Magog, who he caught and brought back to London. And the saying goes, so long as the stone of Brutus is safe, London will flourish. There was even a giant bone, a thigh bone, was on display at Mary Wall Church nearby for many, many years. And the stone itself used to be 6 feet high up until the 1700s. And it is said to be the place where all distances from London were measured, suggesting a use of surveying in ancient times, something clearly these so-called giants were adepts of. And even at Tower Hill, we have stories of giants, Bran. We have the giant suit of armour, which is there on the other end of this famous ley line. St Paul's Cathedral is said to be a stone circle under there, according to some traditions. And again, we have this straight line alignment. Rombord of Ilkley Moor, again, there's actually a statue of him in a local shopping centre. He was said to have moved through the landscape, and he was hotly pursued by his giant wife, who dropped an apron full of stones at various locations along the route and created the stone circle and some of these carved stones along the way. One of the themes is obviously the title of Anthony Roberts' book. This is a brilliant picture. I found on the internet, sorry, appears to be some kind of giant kind of lightning monster, but it's a good representation of sowers of thunder, that these ancient giants, not only were they marking things in the landscape by moving stones and earth, they were actually controlling the weather. They were like master shamans or sorcerers. They had power over stones, the land, and they could pretty much do anything. The weather. We have many stories. This is kind of the sowers of thunder. The story really is that if you disturb a giant's grave, even nowadays, great thunder and lightning will occur. This has happened on many occasions. It's been recorded. We have an entire chapter devoted to this, suggesting they could put curses on graves like Tutankhamun could in ancient Egypt. We obviously have the Long Man of Wilmington. This is some idea of Alfred Watkins that this is the Dog Man. But here we have legends before this describing two giants who lived on the two hills, Windover Hill where the Long Man is, and Firle Beacon. They would throw earth and boulders to each other, and they got agitated, they started fighting. And after a long battle, the Windover Hill giant was defeated, and it said that the local people then drew a chalk outline around his body, and this is what's left there. But he's holding these two staffs, which are believed to be surveyor's staffs. And even from there, we have multiple ley lines going through this particular area. There's even stories of phantom black dogs, which are also associated often with these straight lines. We have in Hertfordshire the lost thigh bone of Jack-o'-legs. This is interesting. This is two blocks of stone 14 feet apart, buried in this particular graveyard. And they talk about... sorry, I just lost my notes here, one second. Yeah, and this talks about how when he got caught because he was a thief or something like this, he fired an arrow over a specific distance and landed in a certain spot in a dead straight line, and that's where he would be buried. They would often choose. Again, we're talking about straight line alignments. We have a similar arrow mythos thing here at a place called Brent Pelham in Essex, I think. And there was Piers Shonks, was a so-called 23-foot tall giant who existed. And again, to escape this big elaborate story, we're going to go into this in the book, and there's lots of megaliths here just around this church, suggesting this was a megalithic site. This is also the location of part of the Nuthampstead Zodiac, which is like a landscape zodiac found in this part of kind of North Essex, going into Hertfordshire, which various people have written about. And he was going to be taken away by the devil for all the deeds he was doing. And the devil said, I will keep you if you're not in the church, and I'll keep your soul if you are buried outside the church. So he fired the arrow into the wall of the church and was buried there. So he defeated the devil and his soul was free. But this is a story, it goes into great detail, I'm not going to do it all here, of a 23-foot giant with all this mythos, again, firing arrows in straight lines. Excuse me. Tom Hickathrift as well, in Suffolk, he was called the Giant of the Marshes. Similar stories associated with him. He famously battled the giant at Wisbeach. He was said to live in various parts of Norfolk and Suffolk. He's depicted on pub signs and local town signs in the area. And one of the stories is that he would throw a massive hammer great distances when he was doing his building work. He kicked a stone football, amazingly, 6 miles in a dead straight line, and it landed in a certain church where he was eventually buried. And there's actually a grave there of a 7'6" long burial, suggesting that may have been him, and a 7'4" coffin, the one on the bottom left there, was said to be found there. There's much more symbolism associated with this as well. And we have the famous Wandlebury giants, because some of the symbols he has is like this wooden wheel, which is like a sun disk, and we find the same sun disk potentially on the image on the right here. It could be this legend of Tom Hickathrift. It actually goes back to an earlier time, and it's actually like linked with the Iceni. So Ick is to do with the Iceni or Icknield Way, the Hickathrift. So it could go back much, much further than this relatively modern, a few hundred-year-old legend. And this was found by Tom Lethbridge on the Wandlebury Hill Fort in the 1950s. And this is thought to be this Hickathrift kind of god, who may have been from a much earlier epoch. So we're looking here at many different things when we come to these stories, the geomythics, the song lines. It's almost like these stories are encoded so deeply in the landscape that we pick them up when you go to these sites. And you can kind of, if you're taught to read the landscape and read the sites, you start gathering the data and understanding things on different levels. Stonehenge is, there's many different accounts here. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. But there are giant stories at Stonehenge. We have the whole story of, Merlin getting the giants originally brought the stones over from Africa to Kilarus Island, and Merlin brought them over in a dead straight line using ancient kind of engineering technology. We have actual accounts in this area. This is a 9'4" skeleton found very nearby, 1719. We have 1802. We have more accounts here, up to 14 feet tall in some accounts. Just nearby in the landscape, large skeletons were found that when they dug out the grave, great storms would occur. Here's a representation of, potentially, I think, this is a good representation of what these unusual people called the Kangic giants, or the Kangi, or Kangi, and they were based in Somerset, and these were thought to be a race of giants who actually built Stonehenge. And there's stories that go way, way back, and this was published in the late 1600s. Which is very hard to get booked by a Reverend Robert Gay, was the guy's name. No one knew who he was for a long time until it kind of came out recently that he was actually, this Reverend was also a bit of an anarchist at the time, which he's got quite a story about him. But these Kangic giants, who were said to have built Stonehenge in one of their final battles against the Belgae, they also saw Stonehenge as a play place where they would mess around, where a game was a complicated cricket with the holes in the stones in the uprights and where they passed through the balls in their sport. And so there's very interesting, kind of strange connotations to other aspects of the meaning of these sites. And we have quite a few accounts all through Somerset of these so-called Kangic giants, and they may have been the ones that were found in Glastonbury Abbey. Obviously we have the rather rude Cern giant. But again, this is a clear representation of a giant person with a club, a Hercules. It could be multiple different people. Who it is, we don't know. It could be one of the Kangic giants. It could be someone else. But we find many connections to ancient sites and alignments associated with this, even to Stonehenge and down to Salisbury, where these actual giant skeletons were found, often with these triangles, which we keep coming back to. Another aspect of Stonehenge is the brilliant work of Robin Heath, who has inspired me in many ways. And the next segment, we're going to talk about some of his research, which fits in with what we're talking about here. He found this great lunation triangle, which is 2,500 times larger than the 4 station stones in Stonehenge. But it's a Pythagorean triangle long before Pythagoras was born. But many of the sites, Stonehenge, Lundy, and the Preseli Bluestone site, all these 3 sites have giant burials at them, where actual skeletons were found, all over 8 to 9 feet tall. We have legends here as well. We had Welwyn and Gwelmai, who was a prince of gigantic size, who was said to have lived in this area. There was a grave 14 feet in length found at a castle nearby. And this is where the skeleton was said to have been unearthed, just a few miles from here. On Lundy Island, we have this geodetic connection with Stonehenge and Preseli. And here, some remarkable things were discovered. That's actually me and Robin and Stuart Mason and a few others there in 2007, where we were doing some surveying, and we rediscovered this lost stone circle, which is called the Lundy Egg. But a long time before this, in the late 1800s, some over 8.5 foot tall skeletons were found on a very prominent part of the island, close to where this point on the lunation triangle is. And it makes you wonder, because there are Celtic traditions where you would take your great kings to the west, to these lost lands, to these lands covered in mist, to place the burials. People often thought that was Avalon. Well, actually, it could be Lundy Island. And Lundy Island also has a connection with Kronos, the great king of the Titans of ancient Greece, where it said he was buried in an island off the coast of England, again shrouded in mist, which could be Lundy Island. Stonehenge is also connected with Arborough, stone circle up in the up north, basically, up in Derbyshire. It's a very interesting site. Nearby, a skeleton of extraordinary size was found about 3 miles south of there. And this was recorded by Robert Plot in his Staffordshire book, several hundred years old. But again, we keep finding these triangles connecting these sites. Even at Brinkheadley D and in the surrounding area on Anglesey, we have like 15 really strong giant accounts that we've uncovered there. And so we just keep finding these connections. So what are they? Are they a representation of giant intellect and these astronomer people moving through the land? Or is it something else? We even have Callanish connected with Arbelo by 5 degrees north and south, creating this wonderful triangle through the landscape. And of course, the trilithons, said to come from North Africa, brought over by giants from Stonehenge, to Stonehenge. And these are actually photographed in the area of Tripoli in Libya. But I've just got a few more minutes here. I'm just going to whip through these quickly so JJ can get 13 minutes in here. But the whole of Wales is like giant territory. It really is too much to deal with. It's quite remarkable. This is just one account out of hundreds we have from there, from 1898. It kind of summarises what's going on with the landscape of Wales. We have Samson, who's supposedly a giant, huge rocks employed for quoits, throwing stones around, hills played with red marbles, and so on and so forth. And this is really the geomantic nature of ancient Wales. And this brilliant book, The Giants of Wales by Chris Grooms, is one of our source books for this, really. But this is Cadet Idris. It's a fascinating place. I've not been up here, but I know Andrew went up there with some friends, and this is the place. It means Idris's chair, or Idris's seat, and it's said to be he was one of the 3 holy astronomers of Britain. And he surveyed his land from this spot, and he could see in all directions to all corners of his land. And so great was their knowledge of the stars, him and the 2 other holy astronomers. One of them was Gwyn ap Nudd, king of the fairies, based in Glastonbury. And a certain writer called Lolo wrote in the 18th century. So great was their knowledge of the stars and of their natures and influences that they could foretell whatever anyone might wish to know till the day of judgment. And there's all these stories connecting with them, where they would throw stones into the landscape, and the stones are still there now in specific directions from Cadet Idris, and so on and so forth. And you can actually still go and see some of these now. An artist actually placed a chair on top of the mountain to represent the chair of Idris, or the seat of Idris, in this area. But there are other poems and old stories that talk about this place, that go on and on about the significance here, because what's really interesting is the fact that Idris is the name of Enoch in Islamic tradition. And so there's also a site called Khan Enoch in the Preseli area as well, which has got some interesting carvings, which we'll have a look at in a moment. There's stories of Idris dropping pebbles from his shoes in certain orientations, and this is where big megaliths land up in straight lines. And there's even an account from 1695 where some extraordinarily large skeletons were found in the middle of that century at a specific farm that actually Andrew went to on a recent sort of quest he spoke about at the Green Stone Conference. And this is all recorded in literature. He was buried there in a specific coffin, these extraordinarily large skeletons. And so we have Idris is connected. There's an Idris mound at Haran in southeast Turkey, which goes back to almost to the time of Göbekli Tepe. This is actually at Karahan Tepe, this photo of our group there a few years ago. But they talk about Idris and Enoch in the same thing. He's the same principle. And it's also Hermes as well, possibly Thoth, all connected with this. So what was he doing? Is there a connection with him in Britain? And actually there is. We actually have the stories from the Book of Enoch that talk about him being taken to the north by the angel Uriel and looking through these different portals and measuring and so forth. And this is, Robin Heath noted this in his book Sun, Moon and Stonehenge, that he actually looks through certain portals and records certain times of the year to the east and west. And he worked this out as what is the latitude here. And Robin worked out that it was almost precisely the latitude of Stonehenge. So this description of Enoch being transported over here may be real. He may be a real person, and he was connecting with the people who were building these sites in the British Isles. And here we have more descriptions, and this is an analysis that was put together that kind of links all this up. And some proper research was done on this, some analysis by Robin Heath, and he found that the latitude could almost very closely match Stonehenge, specifically if you stand at the top of the horseshoe of large trilithons in the centre of Stonehenge. And so I'm intrigued by this because even in the stories of Taliesin in ancient Wales, they talk about Taliesin teaching Enoch the arts of astronomy and working with the landscape. So if Enoch did actually come over, he was actually taught by local giants, possibly. So I think that's pretty interesting. Even on Carn Enoch itself, we have this, these calendrical carvings that are there. So everywhere you look, we keep finding this same thing. And this, I have to emphasize, this is a brief introduction to a chapter we're writing in the book. So all the research is in process at the moment, but I'm so kind of bamboozled, blown away by this. I wanted to share this with you today. We have the giantess's Aprilful, which is something JJ is going to get into, in many different parts of Britain and even all over the world. This is a famous one on the Isle of Anglesey. Even ghosts wear aprons, according to some traditions. But what we must notice is that this is potentially global as well. This idea of this working with the land, these ley lines, these orientations, this astronomy, it's all connected. And even in Malta and Gozo, there's stories of the goddess Sansuna striding across the landscape, dropping stones from her apron, creating Sansuna Dolmen on the top left, then Gigantia. And if you actually follow that alignment, it connects precisely with the Bujiba temple, which is the location of another site. And so, we're finding these things all over the country. And this is a brilliant illustration. Who could have built these things? And so these idea of quoits and other such things, even they throw them across the sea over to Ireland from Wales. We have many stories talking about this. A chief titan from Wales, from Erin Vale, will throw them into Erin's Valley in Ireland. And we find many different associations with giants and bones being discovered, even in the Boyne Valley, such as here at Four Knocks. We have this as well, which we've investigated for the forthcoming book. We think this may or may not be a hoax. We're not going to reveal that until we do with the full information. But really, we're moving now into the area of La Cruz. This is where JJ is going to share her research of the connections between La Cruz, the Boyne Valley, and the Winnemucca giants of ancient America. And there's actually a video we created when we visited La Cruz and looking at some of these aspects, which you can check out on our YouTube channel. So thank you for listening to my part of the talk. If you just hang back just for a couple of minutes, chat between yourselves, we're going to switch the mics and get straight into the next part of the talks. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's different. That's John Martin's thing. Piling all the wooden blocks together.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, that's not that giant.
Oh, is that not?
It's all that.
Yes.
He's done very well, actually. Those are really selling well, those big things.
It's a very smart so it kind of slots into the, yeah, it almost looks a bit sciencey.
Yeah, but that's the John Martin's very good. Make a book for your house this month.
Change it.
with the old drawing. It's more about the old illustrations. They must have learned in a moment. Yes, it's the two.
Look out now. Very important, that message. It's all about there's not much story. Once you accept it, you've got to. It's all about.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being patient. We're just sorting out the technology here. So now we have a 30-minute part 2 of the presentation by the wonderful JJ Ainsworth. Please give her a warm round of applause.
Can y'all hear me okay? Yeah. I'm from the south of the USA, so I talk kind of slow, but I'm going to try to speed it up for y'all. So I'm going to talk about the Boyne Valley area of Ireland, specifically Loughcrew, but also Newgrange, Nath, and Douth, focusing mainly on Loughcrew. And this is Newgrange, and I just want to show you a few images of that so you kind of know the area I'm talking about if you're not familiar with it. And this is one of the famous curbstones at Newgrange. And this is Douth. And it's kind of not in that great shape compared to the other sites of the Boyne Valley. And this is an aerial of Nath. And it has amazing curbstones with all kinds of beautiful symbols. Okay, now this is Loughcrew. And it's Neolithic age structure dated to about 3300 BC. And this is just another view of that. So Loughcrew has an interesting story attached to it involving a giantess, sometimes called Garavogue, who came from the northwest with a collection of rocks she dropped from her white apron. Sometimes she's called Calich, forgive me for the pronunciations, which literally translates as old woman or hag, and it comes from the old Gaelic word for veld one. And anytime you hear veld one, pay attention, because this is sort of information that maybe has 2 or 3 meanings if you can understand what is being said. And most people don't, but it's a way of allegorical teaching. So I'm going to talk a bit about her. I'm going to actually read a poem or a writing by Jonathan Swift, circa 1720. About the old hag or witch or giantess. Determined now her tomb to build, her ample skirt with stones she filled, and dropped a heap on Carn Moor, then stepped 1,000 yards to lore, and dropped another goodly heap, and then with one prodigious leap, gained Carnbeg, and on its height displayed the wonders of her might. And when she approached death's awful doom, her chair was placed within the womb. So it sounds like a really nice little story, but notice inside of that were mentions of directions or lengths, and these are important. And in some stories, she has blue skin and one eye, which is not unlike the ancient stories of Cyclops, who were also constructors or builders. She's an extremely ancient and powerful creator deity. The Calich is an ancient goddess of Ireland and Scotland who over time was sort of changed into what we now know as the ugly old witch. So she's sometimes shown as a giant old woman who wears an apron and carries a basket on her back. Several mountains and hills were created when she dropped these rocks from her apron while leaping from these hills. And she sometimes held a hammer that shaped the earth. And at Loughcrew is this really large curbstone, but it's known as the Hag's Chair. And it has amazing symbols carved on it, which I'll talk about momentarily. And this is the size. This is me sitting on it, enjoying it. So it is quite large. And this is the entrance to the Loftgrave passageway. And inside of it, it has many carvings along the walls and just all through it, even on the ceiling. And I luckily got to go inside and visit and examine it. And this image here on the right shows me at the special stone. It's called the Equinox Stone, and it's Cairn T. And it is quite a small stone, but it is packed with really important symbols, which I'll talk about. And here's a better view of it. And Martin Brennan discovered that Cairn T receives the beams of the rising sun on the spring and autumn equinoxes, which happens twice a year. And this is what you would see on that day, on those days. So the light would shine down the passage and illuminate these really beautiful symbols, which I haven't got to visit at that time, but I plan on trying to do so, and I encourage you to as well. Okay, so the next place I want to talk about is in Nevada in the USA, and it's called the Winnemucca petroglyphs, and it's North America's oldest petroglyphs and could have been carved up to 14,800 years ago, and that is very old. And we know the dating is accurate because in 2013, a team of researchers from the University of Colorado at Boulder performed scientific tests which showed the age of the carvings to be between 14,800 and 10,500 years ago. They lie within the Pyramid Lake Paiute Indian Reservation, which makes the site hard to get to, and you have to get permission to visit. And I know somebody that's still on a waiting list 3 years to try to go. And this is me in front of one of my couple of favorite petroglyphs, and these are huge. They are not only the oldest, but they are so big in size they might be the largest. And I need to note as well that the stone it's carved on is tufa limestone, and it used to be one really large piece, but over time, with its age, it broke into pieces around. And this site is also connected to the giant boar with the red-haired cannibalistic variety called the Sitka, which Hugh sometimes speaks about. And also there's a feminine giantess that sits watch over the area near the petroglyphs. She is known as the Stone Mother, and her story relates to the Paiute creation myth. And I took an excerpt from Brad Olson's book, Sacred Places of North America, and I'll read a bit of that to you. The story begins with the father of all Indians who lived on a mountain near Pyramid Lake. He married a good woman who bore him many children. The oldest boy was very cruel and was sent west with another daughter, while the nice children remained with their mother and became known as the Paiutes. The father returned to the mountains and then to the sky, but the mother grieved for her lost children, and she began crying bitterly every day. She sat on a mountain facing west, and her tears began to form a great lake beneath her. This became Pyramid Lake, and she sat for so long that she eventually turned to stone. And there she remains to this day, sitting on the eastern shore, facing west with her basket by her side, guarding both it and the pyramid. Now, I am very interested anytime I see a guardian figure watching over another site relating to creation myths. And so it was striking to me that in Egypt, the Sphinx guards the pyramids there, and also the Paiute creation myth in the USA, which is an older area, supposedly, than in Egypt. And here is just a image for you to see the Pyramid of Khafre in Egypt, and then at Pyramid Lake in Nevada, USA. It's quite interesting. So you can see how similar they are. But not only do the pyramids on the Giza Plateau have legends and stories of underground subterranean chambers, but the Pyramid Lake structure has the same tales told about it, and that's really interesting. So I'm going to get into some symbol comparisons, and I have to note that the Winnemucca ones are a bit difficult to see because of the type of stone it is, so I did some small illustrations and I hope will help you. And this is my absolute favorite symbol at Winnemucca, and I have a few images of me just to show you the size. They are so big and they are cut so deep into the rock. Whoever carved these, they wanted them to last, and they did. And this is that same symbol, just a bit of a close-up for you guys. And it's this symbol itself is known worldwide as an attribute of the elite, the rosette style. And here is the one on the Equinox stone in Ireland at Loughcrew. And I'm showing you this side by side so you can sort of see that I'm not embellishing or changing anything. So in Winnemucca, the oldest ones in the USA, on this one giant rock, has all these amazing symbols. And all of these symbols that are in Loughcrew on that Equinox stone are located on the ones in Nevada. Every single one. And that's really important. We don't know why that is, but to me, it maybe harkens back to some sort of older hidden language or lost symbology saying something that was on a worldwide scale. And next, these are just going to be images that are both on Loughcrew and Winnemucca. And because they're hard to see, you can see the one that I just showed that looked like the rainbow pattern, and it is up there. I'm so sorry about the imagery, but also at Loughcrew on the Hag's chair, the symbols are also there, matching, which is amazing to me. The whole site of Loughcrew and Winnemucca are connected. And the symbol of the circle and the dot, which for Egypt we might call that the Ra symbol, but it's at both places. And again, at Loughcrew and Winnemucca is the, sun pattern with a dot in it. It's very difficult to see. And at both places again is the zigzag pattern. And this pattern is related to the feminine. It denotes water and, serpent imagery as well. I'm not saying that snakes, women, whatever. Do you understand? Sorry. But so here's another sort of leafy pattern at Winnemucca. And when you go to visit Winnemucca, it really is a magical place. I've never felt so in awe whenever I got to the site. It just felt, it was something unexpected for me. I'm a person that likes physical evidence, and when I went there, I was feeling a very strange sort of aura, and I've never had that experience before, so I know it's a really special site. And so the image here is showing the patterns at Winnemucca, Loughcrew, and here the imagery I'm showing you, what might be shown is an acacia leaf, which has sort of shamanic properties if it's ingested or made up a certain way. Now, I'm not sure if that's what it is, but you're that's good. I feel better. So here it is. The acacia leaf I just showed you was sort of in stone. It looks very similar. So I'll just continue on here with some of the patterns at both places. And then this is like a crest. And maybe this is a little bit better. This is Winnemucca and Loughcrew, the Haggis chair. And this is sort of a flowery like cross, and I can see at the Winnemucca one over there with the tufa limestone, it is difficult, but believe me, it's the same. And then we have the cup and reed marks, or the cup marks that are, many Neolithic sites have it, but for me, I just want to show that it is at Loughcrew and at Winnemucca. And here is another pattern, the exact same ones, found at both locations. Okay, so here I am again at the equinox stone, and this is my favorite symbol on the equinox stone. And my favorite symbol at Winnemucca. Now, what I want to show here at Winnemucca is that above this rosette, this flower symbol, is a crest attached. Okay, this is a very complex symbol. You don't see that everywhere. It's very unusual. And this crest is also on the Loughcrew equinox stone. So that, to me, speaks of a connection that really can't be denied. It's really important, and I'm still looking into the meaning of this, but when you research old writings and things, it's quite difficult, but I'm still going to research and have a part 2 to this, and I'll put it online for you guys if you're interested. So just another outline of the equinox crest at the top to show you that it is exact. And my next slides are just going to show you from the Boyne Valley and Winnemucca that all of the symbols that are there you will find in the USA at the site. And the rhombus serpent feminine pattern also in at Newgrange and Winnemucca. And this is the stone, the curved stone 52 that I took the previous image from. And this pattern is pretty much the same pattern at both Winnemucca and Newgrange, but it's a little bit stylized on the right, maybe representing the 3 stars of Orion's belt on the wings, but I just call this the butterfly pattern because there's not really any name for it. And also, I would like to add a site to this grouping of symbols. And I'm just going to briefly mention this one, and it's in Paraguay. And it too contains all the same symbols that you saw in the previous comparisons. And the site has the stories of the giants attached to it, which is interesting. Now, I don't research giants, I don't chase them, but when you go back researching old symbols, you run smack into it. So, it's something I have to delve into. So this is one of the areas, the stone wall, the stone canvas, where they left their art, showing some of the symbols in Paraguay. Now, I'd like you to note that I've visited the Winnemucca Lake petroglyphs and the ones at Loughcrew several times, but I have not yet made it to the ones in Paraguay. So all I can do for now is just use the images that I find on the internet, but I hope to make that journey soon and have my own photos. So the Paraguay here, listed, it has the same sort of leafy pattern. From different artists portraying the same thing, it'll be changed a bit, but overall, the mathematics of all the same symbols being on one stone at each site, forget about it, they're connected. And again, in Paraguay, we have these sort of rounded ends or zigzags, just like at all the other places. And here is me next to one of my favorite rounded zigzag ones. Winnemucca is just amazing. It really is. And we don't put up the GPS or anything of the site because we want to protect it. And if you do get to visit it, you're going to have to apply to do so. But I really encourage you to do so. And at Paraguay, just like at the other two sites, we have the crest. Now, I'd like to continue on and talk a bit about the giants, but not too much. So, the giants seem to still be out and about. So, this photo was taken at the summer solstice at Stonehenge. And I found this remarkable guy who looks very much like the giant that Merlin was directing to place the lintel stone. I asked him why he came, and he said he didn't really know. He felt compelled, and I thanked him and asked him to always come back. Hugh was there, the giant hunter, didn't spot him. Nothing. So, I am really curious as to why these sites across the globe have such similar stories surrounding their creation. And these stories attached are creation myths, like the stone mother, the apron wearing giantess. It is not just creation of life, but maybe the earth itself. And the symbols carved on all of these places on these stones relate to feminine aspects, which is the life of the biological form, but the earth itself as well. I'm so interested in this. And this just shows the area on the earth of the three sites, the distances I was talking about, in case you were curious. So, as I mentioned, I am really amazed about the same symbols at each site. So I don't know what's going on here. I'm going to research this until I find the answer, and I may never find the answer, but I won't stop. So I was wondering, is this like an allegorical code, a knowledge shared and cared for over thousands of years, yielding only to those who are chosen to receive the knowledge? Maybe. So, as mentioned before about the aprons, these aprons are usually involved with bags, baskets, megaliths, large stones. The term apron in relation to giants and other magical creatures shows up often. So I wanted to find out where the word apron came from. And I'm glad that I was curious, so I did a bit of the research and found out some very interesting and enlightening information. So, the apron is apparently an old-time knowledge. And if you go all the way back to Latin, you can trace the roots of apron to the word mappa, which means both tablecloth and map. So surveying, this apron is a tool. So often old maps were on leather or cloth. So if you spread your large map out on a table, it's a lot like a tablecloth is. Why we have that today, the term tablecloth. And indeed, when you had accomplished your task with the cloth, you could quickly bundle it up, carry it away with you, allegorically, whatever it contained, tools, seed, knowledge, perhaps. So I thought a bit about more than this, and I realized it is a story of ancient special beings possibly doing the surveying, the measuring, the building of the landscape. Maybe even what we might call terraforming. So it's a hidden or lost secret knowledge that today we really can't even fathom the possibility of this because we think we know everything, and we really don't. So in ancient Egypt, aprons were important as well. You would see aprons with the point upward shown when the wearer is performing some kind of ceremony or initiation. And that's the pyramid structure. So aprons were associated with shaman, gods and goddesses, aprons of knowledge. So fertility goddess figurines may be the oldest depictions that we can see and relate to, showing the example of the aprons. But coming up into modern times, if you recognize this, you will know that this is a Masonic apron. And on the chair to her right is that symbol, my favorite symbol at Loughborough in Winnemucca, the rosette style, and she's pointing to the book. So to me, it is still contained in secret societies, but you have to pay a lot of attention to that. And again, just another of these sort of aprons with a lot of the symbols. And I myself am proud to be a Mason, an Eastern Star. And this is a close-up of one of the aprons. And at the bottom, you can see the rosette, my favorite lovely symbol. And the acacia, or wheat, is also there. A lot of times you might see it and just say it's a wheat symbol, but we know we can interchange that with these sort of shamanic, you can intake it and have different visions, just different things like that. So over here, from Syria and other places, I think that the true meaning is really lost today for these symbols, but you see these images of the famous bird deity and guy carrying the pell or the bag of knowledge and wearing these aprons that are similar to what is worn today. So even though a lot of the knowledge is gone and we only have a sliver, I'm still going to look, and I encourage you guys to do so as well. And if you find something out, email me, please. Yep. So the rosette here was on one of the previous images' arms there. It's prominent and it's related to the elite, as I mentioned previously. So I'm not exactly sure. I can't explain what it is, but I am completely convinced that in the very, very ancient past, because almost 15,000 years ago, those symbols were carved in America. And then we have them in Ireland and Paraguay. So mainstream archaeology will tell us that there was no connections, that there was no crossings, but there had to have been if we use our knowledge today of mathematics and saying the amount of symbols at each site. And the complex one, like the crested rosettes, it's very important for us. And so I want to show you my last slide. I know you guys are probably hungry. Is probably the best discovery that you will ever see. I know what Michael Jackson was after. A woman from the New Kingdom period of Egypt. So, thank you guys very much, and I'm really glad you came. And I'm sorry about my southern drawl, but I hope it was understandable. Thank you guys.
So we're going to be back here at 3 o'clock. We've gone over a little